We'll go into Hebrews number 9 and learn a little bit about the furniture in the tabernacle that was there, and try to learn a little bit about that. And so let's read this. We've talked a little bit about it, and let's read on down. Then verily, the verse 1 of Hebrews 9, then verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service and worldly sanctuary. Again, don't make it hard. What's the first covenant, church? That's a question, answer. Huh? What's the first covenant?
First covenant was the law.
The law, okay. Or the Old Testament. Yeah, that's right, correct. Okay. And a worldly sanctuary, the key to that worldly sanctuary, for there was a tabernacle made, the first, wherein was the candlestick and the table and the shewbread, which is called the sanctuary. And after that, the second veil, and the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and the Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant. And that was of the Old Testament, okay, of the law that God gave to Moses, remember. And over it, the cherubims of glory shadowing the mercy seat, of which we cannot now speak particularly. In other words, he said, I'm going to mention this in passing, and he's going to come back and talk about it later. But he says, but cannot now speak particularly. Now, when these things were thus ordained, the priest went always, notice the key word there, always, into the first tabernacle. And notice he's always presenting this as being the first, okay? Accomplishing the service of God, okay? But into the second went the high priest alone, once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself for the errors of the people. The Holy Ghost, this signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure for the time then present. I'm stressing the terminology as we read, because the writer, Paul, is really emphasizing this. He says, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect as pertaining to the conscience, which stood only in meats and drinks and divers washings and carnal ordinances imposed on them until the time of reformation. That's kind of interesting. He calls it the time of reformation. Christ reformed it. The law of the new covenant reformed it, changed it. But Christ, being come and high priest of good things to come, by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this building, neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood he entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. For if the blood of bulls and of goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifieth in the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? And for this cause, he is the mediator of the New Testament, or the New Covenant, that by means of death, for the redemption of the transgressions that were under the first testament, they which are called might receive the promise of eternal inheritance. For where a testament is, a covenant is, there also of necessity be the death of the testator. For a testament is the force is of force after men are dead. Otherwise, it is of no strength at all while the testator lives. Whereupon neither the first testament was dedicated without blood, for when Moses had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and of goats with water and scarlet wood and hyssop and sprinkled both the book and all the people, saying, This is the blood of the New Testament which God hath enjoined unto you. Moreover, he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry, that is, all the furniture in the sanctuary as well. And almost all things are by the law purged with blood. And without the shedding of blood is no remission. It was therefore necessary that the patterns, there's another word there that's key to Hebrews, patterns of things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ is not entered into the holy place made with hands, which are the figures of the true, but into the heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Not yet that he should offer himself often, as the high priest entereth into the holy place every year with blood of others. For then must he often have suffered since the foundation of the world, but now once in the end of the world hath he appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And as it is appointed unto men once to die, after this the judgment. So Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. So I want to back up into this chapter, finish this chapter up this morning in its entirety, if we can. Again, let me describe to you the tabernacle as it sits, okay? The Old Testament tabernacle. It consisted of three areas, if you will. One was the inner court, or the outer court, they referred to it, the outer court. That's when you went into the area of the tabernacle. It was in the front. You didn't actually go into the tabernacle. You went into the outer court, which was where the entrance to the tabernacle was. Out in the front of there was a brazen altar and a brazen laver that took place there. That took place out there in the outer court area, like outside, okay? And then, once you entered into the entrance of the tabernacle, you entered into what's called the holy place. The holy place was a place where the priest daily did his daily duties as a priest. That's where we mentioned in chapter 9 there, it says, there was the candlestick, verse 2, and the table of shewbread, which is called the sanctuary. So you had some pieces of furniture that were in the holy place, and we'll get there in a moment. Okay, you had the lampstand, you had the candlestick, you had the table of shewbread. Then on the table of shewbread, if you go back and read Leviticus, it was 12 loaves of bread, which represented the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's where the priests did eat of that bread, and so, getting them the necessary energy and to do the work of the ministry. That was the purpose of that. That's the reason Jesus comes out and says, okay, I'm the bread of life, because he says, I am the bread, mimicking that tabernacle of the bread in the tabernacle. And, okay, there was also the golden altar to burn incense there in the holy place. Then once you got through there, you went to what they call the third area, which was the most holy place, or the holiest of all. That's where you go into this room. It was divided by a veil. In the veil, they say, about as thick as your hand, had different layers of tapestry that hung. It was real thick from the ceiling to the floor, very wide. and no one penetrated that veil but once a year, and that was the high priest only that could do that. And we'll get there in a moment. Okay, but inside there, the perfect cube, it was a perfect cube as you went into the Holy of Holies. It was the Ark of the Covenant that was there, and in the Ark of the Covenant was the bowl of manna that the children of Israel should have remembered God's provision in the wilderness, and Aaron's rod that budded, and also the table of the copy of the table of stone that Moses received on Mount Sinai. On the mercy seat itself, there was a golden lid on each end. There was a seraphim that sat of gold that watched over the mercy seat. It was all one layer. It was not three pieces. You didn't have two cherubims that fit on the lid. It was all formed into one piece. It's amazing. Okay. Last week I mentioned to you that the mercy seat that he's referring to here, is the fact that in verse 5, the mercy seat, if you go back and read in the Old Testament, it talks about the mercy seat. And if you get the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the same word in the Old Testament that said mercy seat is the same word in our New Testament where we get propitiation from. It's kind of word. The word propitiation is a satisfaction of. So when the priest would go in and sprinkle the blood 7 times on the mercy seat, that satisfied God for a year. And in his holiness for the sin of Israel and the sin of the high priest for 1 year. So he had to always, key word, better, always, continually, whatever the word you want to use there, continue to do his work there in the thing. But in the middle of those cherubims of the gold sat the Shekinah glory, and God came down and dwelt with his people. So let's look at the lampstand just real quick. I'm going to go through these pieces of furniture. The lampstand obviously would cast light into the holy place where the priest could see to do the work that he needed to do. And the furniture of the tabernacle, God gave Moses very strict rules as to how to make it. Anybody remember the wood that it was made out of? Good trivia question. What wood was the furniture of the tabernacle made from? Huh? No. No, you're thinking about the ark. Acacia wood. It's made out of the acacia wood. And it was overlaid with gold. And they would take that wood, dry it out, and overlay it with gold. Okay? And it was kind of interesting when you went into when you went into the holy place. Which we had a rendition of the tabernacle. When you went into the holy place, you would look straight ahead and you'd see the veil that went to the most holy place. So when you would go in, all of this was tapestry driven. All this, the ceiling, the walls, everything, beautiful tapestry, and you had red, blue, purple, and the veil the same. The floor was desert sand. Isn't that kind of amazing? You have this beautiful structure out in the middle of nowhere, but you had a dirt floor. And you say, well, why in the world would you have a dirt floor to such a majestic place? Well, that would remind the priest and all those that were doing the work of the ministry, they were still here on earth.
I got a question.
Okay.
They didn't have much of nothing back in that day. Where did they get the resources and stuff to make all these fancy cloths that they had?
That's a good question. I would imagine they acquired them from various means. They had to have had, but obviously, the Lord provided them. And the gold and all that, but that is a good question.
I think they had needles and all that such as that.
Yeah. Well, they may have had wood needles. Who knows? But it's funny you mentioned that question, and here you are. You have this elaborate tapestry that they put in the tabernacle. Did the same thing in the temple. They overlaid it with gold. Took all of that time to do it. Just imagine the time, not only the resources, but the time that it took. And today, I want you to compare what was done then to what's not done now. We have all the resources in the world, but we do a lot of times the Lord's work the cheapest way that we can do it, and don't put the time or the resources in it that maybe should be. Now, the only group that still does that I know of are the Catholics. You go to the Catholic synagogue or Catholic cathedrals all over the world, and I don't care where you go. You can go in the middle of Mexico where there's nothing, and you're going to see an elaborate structure, and you're going to go into it, and there's going to be beautiful stained glass, and it's going to be beautiful inside. Same way in the war-torn area of Europe. You go to Europe, and you go into those churches, those older churches that, during the World War II, I don't know if a lot of you remember and realize this, but when they realized they were going to bombard Europe and bombard Germany particularly, a lot of the people, and a lot of the priests, and a lot of the workers of the churches went in and took all that stained glass out of those buildings and put them down into the catacombs in Europe and saved a lot of that stained glass. So you go in there now and see this beautiful stained glass that's hundreds and hundreds of years old that was preserved through the war. It was amazing, but beautiful. But we don't put that kind of stuff in there. People don't want to give the money. They don't want to give the resources. But these people back in the day, I think where they got it from, Scott, to answer your question was, these people, it was God worked out a plan. You had the Levitical tribe that did all the work of the tabernacle. They set it up, took it down, hauled it, and they did everything. But it was up to the other 11 tribes to fund it. They had to give of the first fruits of everything they had to the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi was where the priesthood came from, also the tabernacle and all of the resources that the priests needed to live on. It was the other 11 tribes that took care of those. And so the resources came from them, but it is amazing what they had out in the middle of nowhere, And all the tapestry, a lot of it could have been taken away, I imagine, from Egypt as well. But the veil, again, the same. The lampstand was enlightenment, again, so the priest could do his work. And when you would go in, the lampstand would have been to your left. If you would go in, I'm trying to give you a picture of where it would be. When you would go into the holy place, the lampstand would have been to your left. The table of shewbread would have been on the right. You're going on the right. And it's interesting, if you look at the pieces of furniture in the holy place, they are situated to make the perfect cross. Because Christ is each of those things. Okay? He is each of those things. The 12 loaves of bread, again, represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And that was changed out weekly. And it was, again, the tribes of Israel that brought this bread to the priest. The priest ate the bread, and again, it was symbolically that they fed on that to do the work that they needed to do. And then next, you had what was called the veil. And so the writer here in Hebrews 9, he takes us beyond the veil into the Holy of Holies. And then he says, I'm not going to speak on it much. He's going to come back to it. And he will. And again, the Holy of Holies was a perfect cube. Both the tabernacle and the temple was. The Shekinah glory was the light of the holy place. There was no light in there. There was no candlestick in there. The Shekinah glory was the light. And it was a type of the Lord Jesus. The writer is sketching the tabernacle out for us, so that we can see it in our mind. Before you would go into the veil, the golden censer would be there. Now, the golden censer, and you might ask yourself, well, why is it in the holy place? Because on the Day of Atonement, that's the only time the golden censer was used. And the golden censer was used by the high priest of that. Because here's a normal day of events in the tabernacle. Let me give you the normal day of events. This happened every day, except for the one day of the Day of Atonement. Okay, the priest would enter in and burn incense on the golden altar which was in the holy place. Okay? And that was near the veil. So you had the golden altar, you had the table of shewbread, you had the lampstand. You see the cross, okay, in the holy place. All right? When he would burn incense into the holy place, that incense would fill the room and would seep through the veil and go into the most holy place. Okay? Think about that just for a moment. Because it's the opposite on the Day of Atonement. On the Day of Atonement, he would take the golden censer and wouldn't burn incense until he went into the holy place, in the most holy place, and he would take it filled with coals. He would go in through the veil, and he would drop incense on the golden censer and fill the Holy of Holies with incense, and the incense from the Holy of Holies would seep back through into the holy place. Kind of backwards, different, opposite of what it was. And so as he passed through the veil into the Holy of Holies, and that clouds of perfume would rise and go back into it. That's why the golden censer was on the holy place side, not on the Holy of Holy place side, because he had to do that upon entering the holy place, a most holy place, because remember, the incense was done for a lot of things. The sins of the nation, but also to obscure the view of the high priest so he couldn't see the Ark of the Covenant. So it served as twofold, okay? And so next, you had this Ark of the Covenant, and he would take that incense and he'd take that bowl of blood. Remember? He took in with him the golden censer full of hot coals, incense, and a bowl of blood. The bowl of blood was from the bullock that was slaughtered outside on the brazen altar. And he would take that blood of that bullock and he would take it in there and sprinkle it 7 times on the mercy seat. Why 7 times? Anybody got an answer? Yeah, 7 is a kind of, I don't get into numerology in the scriptures a whole lot, but 7 is significant because 7 seems to be the number of completion, and plus that's what God said to do, so you do it the way God tells you to do it, okay? And so now you have the cherubims that are the protection over the mercy seat there in the holy place. And the mercy seat, again, the word propitiation, the word pardon, word satisfaction comes to play when you think about the mercy seat. So we see the limitation of the priest here. We see Bible typology here, the symbolism of the Day of Atonement. Read Leviticus, and I'll give you some homework, okay? Read Leviticus 16, all right? The annual feast that they still have. The national guilt was visited and asked for forgiveness of and dealt with and put away for a year, and it was done symbolically through the blood of bulls. That's the reason back in our text in chapter 9 it says verse 12, neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood. And then later on in this chapter, he says, look at verse 25, nor yet that he should offer himself often as the high priest entered into the holy place every year with the blood of what? Others. Jesus entered in with his own blood. So now we have the death of the testator, which he talked about, remember? Without the death of the testator, you don't have a covenant. Right? So we see the tip. So now the Jews today still celebrate the Day of Atonement, but they don't call it the Day of Atonement. You have to know what it is by the annual feast that they observe. What is the highest holy day of the Jews' religion? Out of all the feasts and all of the things on the calendar, what is the highest holy day of the Jews today? What is it called? Let me give y'all a little bit of a hint. I wanted to go to one. I wanted to go to one of these services, and I went to Montgomery to the Jewish synagogue, and I actually attended one of these services. I just wanted to see what they did. Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur. Okay? That is now you go back Leviticus 16, this is the point that, first of all, the priest had to go on the brazen altar, kill a bullock, and suffer it for his own sin. See, our high priest didn't have to do that. Amen? And so when he would do that, he would take a bath first. I don't know how often they took a bath out there in the desert out there, Scott, but he took a bath. He'd wash himself. And he had put on the high priestly garments that one day of atonement. He would select 2 goats. Why did he select 2 goats? One was a scapegoat because they let it go later. Okay, and he killed. That was the natural burnt offering of the ram, and the sin offering he'd offer that. The burnt offering for that. A key verse in the New Testament that would picture this in the New Testament is 2 Corinthians 5, verse 21. He made him to be sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. He made him to be sin for us, who knew no sin. They put all these sins on animals. The New Covenant puts it all on Christ. See the big difference. He would present these 2 goats at the door of the tabernacle. And he would cast lots to see which one of the goats would be slain and which one of the goats would be let go as a scapegoat. All of this to show the guilt and sin were prevalent in God's people and the nation of Israel. Now the priest, his personal guilt, he had to take care of it with the bullock that he sacrificed. He'd go into the Holy of Place, sprinkle it 7 times. That was for his own sin and the sin of Israel for 1 year. And it was at this point that now he was a type of Christ. And only at that point was he a type of Christ. Isn't that amazing how the intricacies of everything he had to do? He had to do it right, because if he didn't, it could kill him. If he looked at the ark, he could die. If he touched it, he would die. There were specific rules. Now, oral tradition states that when the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies that one time a year, he had bells on the end of his robe. And there are bells. If you look at it, there are bells on the bottom of the robe. Giving the priests that are inside the holy place the idea, said, well, as long as we hear bells, we know he's still moving and doing what he needs to do. Those bells ever stopped. They said there was a rope tied to his feet, his leg. Because if he died in there, ain't nobody going in and get him. There was no provision made that if the high priest died in there that they could go get him. So oral tradition says they tied a rope around him so that they could pull him out if something were to happen. And that's how strict God was. Think about that. Okay? Any questions about the tabernacle? And then we'll pick up chapter 10, and then we're going to pick up that shadow in verse 10 again, and he's going to pick up the mercy seat too that he didn't talk about in chapter 9. Okay?